The diner had always been quiet that time of day. Afternoon sun spilled through the smudged windows, casting long shadows over the faded booths and worn-out linoleum floor. It was the kind of place people stopped in when they had nowhere else to go. Just a dusty roadside cafe with a broken neon sign and coffee that never really tasted fresh. But on that particular afternoon, something unforgettable happened inside those walls. Something that would take 15 years to come full circle. Clarice had just finished wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingled softly. She glanced up with her usual warm smile, expecting another tired traveler or one of the regulars from the nearby bus stop. But instead, two kids stepped inside, no older than 10 or 11. Boy and a girl. Their clothes were too thin for the cool spring air, and their eyes. Well, their eyes carried the kind of sadness you didn't usually see in children. Clarice's smile faltered for just a second before she caught herself. She knew that look. The way kids try to act like everything's fine when they're really just trying not to cry. The boy clutched the girl's hand, and they stood awkwardly near the door, not daring to come closer. She could tell they were hungry. You didn't need to be a detective to figure that part out. "Come on in, sugar," she called, her voice gentle, motherly. "You two want to sit down." The boy hesitated, then slowly led the girl to a booth in the corner. They didn't speak much. The girl just looked around with big, wide eyes while the boy kept his chin up like he was trying to be brave for both of them. Clarice didn't ask questions. She just brought them a plate of pancakes, still warm from the griddle, and 2 glasses of milk. She even added a little whipped cream on top, just to make them smile. "Eat as much as you want," she told them. "Don't worry about paying." The boy looked up at her then. For a split second, his face softened, like maybe the weight he'd been carrying got a little lighter. The girl mumbled a quiet, "Thank you," her voice barely above a whisper. Clarice didn't press them for details. She could see the story written in their eyes. Loss, fear, and a kind of tired that went deeper than just missing a few meals. They were orphans. That much she understood without needing an explanation. That night, long after the kids had quietly slipped out the back door, Clarice sat alone in the kitchen, staring at their empty plates. She didn't know their names. Didn't know where they'd come from or where they'd gone. But something about them stayed with her. Something she couldn't quite explain. She told herself she'd probably never see them again. Life went on. The diner stayed the same. Quiet, a little rundown, but always welcoming. Clarice kept working, always with a kind word and a full coffee pot. She never expected anything in return for the little good she did. In her heart, she believed kindness was just something you gave, not something you traded. 15 years later, on a rainy morning that looked like any other, Clarice was putting out the salt shakers when she noticed something strange out the window. Car. But not just any car. A sleek, black luxury vehicle parked right in front of her small, weathered home across the street. The kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood. The kind of car that looked like it had driven straight out of a different world. She blinked, confused, thinking maybe someone got lost or took a wrong turn. But then the door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, sharply dressed, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't from around here. That much was obvious. Clarice squinted through the rain, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. He crossed the street slowly, not in a hurry, as if he'd been waiting a long time for this moment. And then, just as he reached her front porch, he paused and looked directly at her. Their eyes met, and in that instant something clicked. A memory, a feeling. A flash of a boy with tired eyes and too thin clothes, sitting in a booth with his little sister, trying to look strong. Clarice's breath caught in her throat. Was it him? She opened the door before he could knock, hands trembling without knowing why. The man smiled gently, his eyes warm but unreadable. "Hi," he said. "You probably don't remember me." But she did. Somewhere deep inside she remembered everything. Before she could speak, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded napkin, yellowed with age. She took it with shaking fingers and saw the handwriting, childlike, crooked. A simple note scrawled in pencil. "Thank you for the pancakes. Someday we'll come back." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. And then, from the back seat of the car, the door opened again. Another figure stepped out. A young woman this time. Familiar eyes. The same quiet grace she'd seen that day in the diner, sitting beside her brother, clutching his hand. But before Clarice could speak, before she could ask the million questions swirling in her head, the man gently reached for her hand. "We never forgot you," he said. "And now it's our turn." Clarice stared at them, her mind racing. What did he mean? Why now? Why this car? What had happened in those missing 15 years? And more than anything, what were they here to do? The answers were just seconds away. But for now, all Clarice could do was stand in the doorway, her heart pounding as the rain poured down and the past walked back into her life. Clarice stood frozen in her doorway, rain soaking into the porch wood beneath her bare feet. The luxury car behind them hummed quietly, its sleek body glistening under the gray sky. The young man and woman stood there patiently, giving her time to catch up with what was happening, though they must have known that no amount of time would really prepare her for this. Her hand still clutched the old napkin, now damp from her trembling fingers. That simple note, written so many years ago, suddenly felt like a bridge connecting two entirely different worlds. She cleared her throat, trying to find her voice. "Come in. You'll catch your death out there." They followed her inside quietly, the young woman glancing around the modest living room with soft eyes, as though the space was familiar in some way. Clarice's house was simple, cozy even, with knit blankets on the couch and framed photos of people long gone. Nothing had changed much over the years, just like the diner. That was the kind of life Clarice had built. Routine, stable, filled with small acts of care that rarely drew attention. They sat across from her at the small kitchen table, the silence hanging heavy between them. Clarice reached for the kettle and put it on the stove, more out of habit than anything. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but she kept moving, needing something to focus on. "So," she said finally, not turning around. "You came back." The young man gave a soft chuckle, more thoughtful than amused. "We never really left. Not in here." He tapped his chest gently. "You gave us something that day we didn't know we needed." Clarice turned then, her eyes narrowing as she studied his face. The boy she remembered was still there, beneath the suit and polished shoes and calm demeanor. And the girl, she had grown into a graceful, confident woman, but her eyes hadn't changed. There was still that depth of silence in them, the kind that comes from seeing too much too young. "I don't even know your names," Clarice said. "I'm Daniel," the man replied, offering a small smile. "And this is my sister Hope." Oh. Clarice felt her heart twist. That name was too fitting, almost like something written into a story. But this was real. They were real. Flesh and blood. Not some memory she'd made up to comfort herself on quiet nights. "You were just kids," she whispered. "You looked like you hadn't eaten in days." "We hadn't," Daniel said simply. "We were living in an abandoned house a few streets over. Our parents died in a car accident. We bounced around a few shelters, but nothing stuck. We were on our own." Clarice's throat tightened. She remembered the way the boy had held his sister's hand that day, like he was her only protection from the world. She had always wondered what happened to them, whether they were okay, whether someone found them. But deep down she'd feared the worst. It was too easy for kids like that to disappear. Too easy for people to look the other way. "After we left the diner," Hope said softly, "we got lucky. A woman who ran a church saw us sleeping behind her building. She took us in, helped us enroll in school. She even found a family who eventually adopted us. But we never forgot you." Clarice blinked away the sting behind her eyes. "I didn't do much. Just a plate of pancakes." "You did everything," Daniel said. "That day we were starving. But more than that, we felt invisible, like no one in the world saw us anymore. But you did. You looked at us like we mattered, like we were human." The kettle whistled then, sharp and sudden. Clarice turned quickly, pouring water over 2 tea bags and setting the mugs in front of them. She sat down slowly, her bones aching more than usual. "I still don't understand why you're here now," she said quietly. "After all this time." "Card the napkin. What does it mean?" Daniel looked at his sister, and for the first time, Clarice saw something else flicker in their eyes. Something deeper. Not just gratitude. Not just nostalgia. There was purpose in their visit. Something more than a simple thank you. Hope spoke this time, her voice a little steadier now. "We made a promise. That if we ever had the chance, we'd find you. And that we'd repay your kindness in a way you'd never expect." Clarice's brows pulled together. "Repay me?" Daniel nodded slowly. "We've done well, Clarice. Better than anyone expected. Got a scholarship. Studied business. Started a company with a friend from college. It grew faster than we imagined. Hope runs a non-profit now. Helps kids like we were." Clarice felt a quiet kind of pride settle in her chest. She hadn't needed anything from them. But hearing this, knowing they'd made something of their lives, it felt like the world had come full circle in a way that almost didn't seem real. But there was still something unsaid. "You didn't just come here to tell me you're doing well," she said, her voice low. Hope nodded. "We came here because something is about to change. For you." Clarice tilted her head, uneasy. "What do you mean?" Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek envelope, placing it gently on the table. Clarice stared at it like it might bite. It was heavy, the kind of paper used for wedding invitations or high-level legal documents. "You'll understand soon," Daniel said. "But we need you to trust us. Just like we trusted you." Clarice looked down at the envelope, her hands resting in her lap. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Something in her gut told her that once she opened it, her quiet life would never be the same again. Outside, the rain had started to slow, the world turning still and gray. But inside, everything felt like it was holding its breath. "What's in there?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression serious now, almost too calm. "Before we left that day," he said, "I saw something. Something that stayed with me all these years. And it's part of why we came back." Clarice's heart skipped a beat. "What did you see?" His eyes met hers. "A man in a black car. Watching the diner. Watching you. I didn't understand it then. But now I think it wasn't random that we ended up there." Clarice's breath caught. "Are you saying someone was following me?" Daniel nodded slowly. "We've been looking into it. And we found something." Hope touched her brother's arm gently, her face pale now. "Clarice," she said, "there's more to your past than you know." Clarice leaned back in her chair, the napkin still in her lap, the envelope untouched on the table. Outside, the clouds began to break, but inside, the shadows were only growing deeper. Clarice sat still, her fingers brushing the edge of the envelope but not yet daring to open it. Her kitchen, usually filled with quiet comfort and the soft ticking of the old wall clock, now felt charged, like something just under the surface was ready to break loose. The way Daniel had spoken about the man in the black car all those years ago, the way Hope's voice trembled when she mentioned Clarice's past, it all stirred something deep in her, something she'd never given voice to. Memories she'd buried. Questions she had never asked herself because she'd been too busy surviving. She finally asked, her voice barely holding steady. "What exactly did you find?" Daniel exchanged another glance with Hope, and Clarice caught that flicker of hesitation again. They knew something, and they were carefully measuring how much to share. "We started digging," Daniel said. "Not just into our own records but into that day. That diner." "You." Clarice stiffened. "Why would you do that?" "Because we wanted to thank you properly," Hope said gently. "But the more we looked, the more things didn't add up." Clarice's breath hitched slightly. "Like what?" "Like how the property the diner sits on has no formal purchase history under your name," Daniel said. "Or any lease agreements. It's registered to a holding company, one with ties to some very old businesses. Names that appear and disappear across decades. Clarice blinked. That didn't make sense. That diner was left to me by a friend. He passed away. I just took it over. I never thought twice about it. Daniel leaned forward. What was his name? Clarice had to think. Walter. Walter Green. He ran it before me. I worked there part-time when I was young. Daniel's expression darkened slightly. Clarice, there's no record of a Walter Green ever owning that diner. Not in city records. Not in tax records. Not even in the obituaries. It's like he never existed. Clarice's fingers gripped the edge of the table. That's not possible. I worked with him. I was there. Hope reached into her coat and slid a photograph across the table. It was old, clearly scanned from microfilm or an archived newspaper. The photo showed the diner same as it looked now, but the caption read, "Diner sold to private investor 1982. The man standing in front of it wasn't Walter. Clarice's voice dropped. I don't understand. Daniel nodded slowly. We didn't either. Until we looked at some of the faces connected to that holding company. One of them has a record. Ties to orphanages. And missing persons cases. Cases that were never solved. A chill ran through Clarice. You think I'm involved in something? Hope shook her head. Not you. But someone close to you, maybe someone you trusted. Maybe even someone you don't remember anymore. Clarice's chest tightened. She'd spent her whole life being the one people came to for comfort. The kind word. The extra plate. But now it felt like she was standing in a house built on sand, and the tide had just started to come in. Daniel's tone softened. We believe someone used the diner. Not as a business but as a front. For something else. Back in the 80s, there were whispers of children being moved through certain locations. Quietly, under the radar. No paperwork. No questions asked. Clarice's face paled. You think my diner was one of those places? We don't know for sure, Hope said. But the trail keeps leading back to that address. Even now, certain people are still watching it. That explained the man in the car all those years ago. Watching, waiting. But for what? Clarice looked down at the envelope again. Her hand finally moved, slowly peeling it open. Inside was a photo, one she hadn't seen in decades. It was her in the diner, handing a plate of pancakes to a child. Not Daniel. Not Hope. A different boy. Different time. Her hand froze. I don't remember this, she whispered. Hope nodded. It's from a hidden file we found. There were others. Photos. Even taped conversations. Clarice swallowed hard. The edges of her reality starting to fray. Why me? Daniel's voice was quiet now. Because you were the perfect person to cover it up without ever knowing. Kind. Distracted. Trusted. The kind of person people don't question. Clarice stood slowly, feeling like the air had thickened around her. If someone used my kindness, if children were hurt, how could I not know? Because they didn't want you to, Daniel said. And because you were never supposed to remember. Clarice turned to the window. The rain had stopped completely now. The sky outside was clear, but her mind felt darker than ever. She had always believed she was just a simple woman doing small good things in a forgotten corner of the world. But now it seemed that very corner held secrets so deep, someone had worked hard to keep them buried. Hope stood and placed a hand gently on Clarice's shoulder. There's more. But we can't say it all here. Not yet. You're still being watched. Clarice stiffened. Watched? Daniel rose as well. The man in the car wasn't the last one. We saw another vehicle parked near your place last night. Same model. Same pattern. We think they're keeping tabs on you. Maybe to see if you remember anything. Clarice's voice came out flat. And what happens if I do? Daniel's silence said everything. Clarice finally turned from the window. Her eyes harder now. What do we do? Hope gave a small nod. We need to find out who's behind this. Why? But you're part of it now, whether you want to be or not. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Clarice looked at the photo in her hand one more time, then tucked it back inside the envelope. "I need to see the rest," she said quietly. "Whatever you found. All of it." Daniel met her gaze. "Then you'll need to leave with us. At least for a little while. We've got a safe place, just outside the city." Clarice looked around her little kitchen. The chipped mug by the sink. The threadbare rug by the door. This had been her life for so long. Simple. Quiet. But maybe it had never really been hers to begin with. She nodded. "Give me 10 minutes. Daniel and Hope stepped outside, giving her space. Clarice walked slowly down the hallway toward her bedroom, her legs feeling heavier with every step. She didn't know what she was walking into, but whatever it was no longer something she could ignore. As she packed a small bag, her mind spun with the pieces she had. The boy in the photo. The mysterious diner sale. The man in the black car. It all pointed to something much bigger than her. And somewhere, buried deep in that past, was the truth. She zipped the bag and stood still for a moment, her fingers brushing the cross pendant around her neck. Then she walked back toward the front door. Outside, the car waited. But Clarice didn't know if it was taking her toward safety, or straight into the heart of something far more dangerous. The road out of town felt longer than Clarice remembered. As the car moved past the familiar signs and broken fences, she stared out the window, her fingers curled tightly around the worn leather strap of her bag. Daniel was behind the wheel, silent and focused. Hope sat in the back seat beside Clarice, her presence steady, though her eyes kept scanning the road behind them in the side mirror. It wasn't paranoia, not anymore. They were being watched. Clarice could feel it. A sleek black car had appeared in the distance twice now, lingering just long enough to raise suspicion before turning off or falling back. They didn't speak much for the first hour. There was too much unspoken between them. Clarice's head was spinning. What had she missed all those years ago? Who had been using her diner, and for what? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? As they neared the edge of the city, the scenery shifted. Fewer houses, more trees, and long stretches of empty road. Daniel turned off onto a gravel path hidden by thick brush. The car bounced slightly as they drove in further, the woods swallowing them whole. Finally, they pulled into a clearing where a small cabin stood, half covered in ivy, quiet and tucked away like it had been waiting for them. Daniel parked and cut the engine. "We're safe here," he said softly, though his eyes still flicked toward the trees. For now. Inside the cabin, Clarice sat on a creaky wooden chair near the fireplace while Hope rummaged through a backpack and pulled out a folder, thick and worn, its corners frayed like it had been read 100 times. She placed it on the table in front of Clarice. "We pieced this together from different sources," Hope explained. "Archived newspaper clippings, adoption records, old court files. A few leads from whistleblowers who disappeared before they could say too much." Clarice opened the folder slowly. The first photo stopped her cold. It was the same diner, same window, but taken from a distance, like through a long lens. A timestamp in the corner read March 14, 1985. Below the image, handwritten notes scrawled in red ink mentioned, "Intake scheduled," and "Verify subject Clarice is unaware." Her stomach turned. They were watching me even back then. Daniel nodded. "It wasn't just about you. It was about what they were doing through that place. Using it as a front to quietly move children. Orphans, runaways, undocumented kids, without raising alarms. You were the perfect cover. Trusted. Kind. Never asked too many questions." Clarice shook her head, trying to hold back the growing ache in her chest. "But I never saw anything." "You weren't meant to," Hope said. "Deliveries happened after closing. Documents were falsified. Staff rotated quietly. You weren't the only one they manipulated." Flipping further into the folder, Clarice found an old ledger. Dozens of names. Or rather, initials. Some scratched out. Some marked with check marks. Dates next to each. Some of the entries had codes like T7 or X17. She couldn't understand what they meant, but the sheer number of them made her heart race. "These are kids," she whispered. "Some of them," Daniel replied. We think others were handlers. People working to keep the operation quiet. Some might still be active. Others, well, some disappeared. One of them was your friend, Walter. Clarice looked up. But I knew Walter. He was a good man. Maybe he was, Daniel said. But someone used his identity. Or erased it. The real Walter Green doesn't exist in any public record. Not before or after 1983. Whoever he was, his role was temporary. He might have been protecting you. Or watching you. We just don't know. Clarice closed the folder, her hands shaking. So why now? Why come for me now, after all these years? Hope leaned in closer. Because something's coming. Hearing. A congressional inquiry into missing children from the 1980s. Someone high up wants the past buried for good. And they're afraid you remember more than you think. Clarice blinked slowly. But I don't. I swear I don't. Daniel stood and walked to the window, peering through the blinds. They don't care. Just the risk of you remembering is enough. And if you start talking, if you show up in one of these records, they'll do whatever it takes to keep you quiet. Sighed, a twig snapped. Daniel tensed. Clarice's pulse jumped. What was that? Hope was already moving to shut off the lights. Stay low, she whispered. Daniel stepped away from the window. We didn't shake the car after all. Clarice crouched near the fireplace, her breath coming faster now. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a hunt. Someone had followed them. And if Daniel and Hope were right, that person wasn't just curious. They were dangerous. Footsteps crunched outside, slow and deliberate. The tension inside the cabin thickened. Hope signaled Clarice to stay quiet as Daniel reached for a drawer and pulled out a metal flashlight. It was heavy, likely used for more than just light. Then came a knock. Chilling. Hope whispered. No one knows about this place. Clarice didn't move. She couldn't. Her entire body felt like it was made of stone. Another knock. This time louder. Daniel took a step toward the door. Who is it? No answer. Just silence. Then a voice. Deep, calm and unsettling. Clarice Jenkins. She didn't respond. Couldn't. The voice spoke again. We need to speak with you. Now. Hope mouthed. Don't answer. Clarice swallowed hard. Name. How did they know her name? Daniel motioned for her to move to the back room, and she obeyed, heart pounding so hard she thought it might betray her. From the back room window she peeked out and saw the car. Black. Same as before. The door still open. The driver still inside. Hope joined her. If they're here, it means they're out of time. They're going to act. Tonight. Clarice turned to her, voice shaking. Act how? Hope's eyes didn't waver. However they have to. Back in the front room, the doorknob twisted once, then again. Daniel raised the flashlight, standing his ground. Leave. You're trespassing. The voice answered, colder now. You have no idea what you're involved in. But you will. Then footsteps retreated slowly. Car door shut. The engine roared to life. Daniel waited by the door for a full minute before peeking out. The vehicle was gone, but not for long. The threat was real now. Live. Right outside their safe house. Clarice backed into a chair, her breathing shallow. The folder on the table lay open again, the pages fluttering in the breeze from the cracked window. At the very bottom was a photo she hadn't seen before. Newer, clearer. It was her. Taken just last week. Leaving the diner. Smiling. Holding a tray of coffee. Clarice stared at the image, her mind racing. They weren't just watching her past. They were watching her present. And now, more than ever, they were ready to rewrite her future. Clarice stared at the photo on the table, her breath catching in her throat. The image was sharp. Too sharp to be accidental. Someone had taken it just days ago, and not from across the street or hidden in a crowd. It was close, personal. The angle showed her from the side, in motion, with the kind of focus that only came from someone intentionally tracking her. She could see the reflection of the diner's window behind her in the photo, and in that reflection, a man's silhouette. Hope moved beside her, noticing the same thing. She leaned in, squinting. That shadow. He's been close. Closer than we thought. Daniel returned from the front door. His jaw tense. They're not playing around anymore. They're letting us know we're being watched, and that they're not afraid. Clarice looked at them both. Why now? Why all of a sudden after 15 years? I've been serving pancakes and pouring coffee for most of my life. Why come for me now? Daniel hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a smaller envelope, one he hadn't shown her earlier. We weren't sure how to tell you this part. Clarice's hand trembled as she opened it. Inside was a printed email, dated just a month ago. The subject line read, "Diner testimony. Confirmed witness willing to speak." The message itself was short and to the point. Someone, using a fake name, had reached out to a journalist, offering to speak about the diner, the missing children, and the woman who unknowingly helped it happen. It ended with a time and place. That meeting never happened. Clarice's voice cracked. Who sent this? Daniel replied carefully. We believe it was someone from the inside. Someone who wanted to expose it before things got too quiet again. But they vanished 2 days later. Hope stepped closer, her voice low. The twist is, whoever sent this also left behind something else. She handed Clarice a folded map. Hand-drawn, detailed, and marked with red ink. It showed the area behind the diner. The alley, the old storm drains, a storage room that had been locked up for decades. There was a circle drawn around a part of the basement Clarice had never entered. A small hatch she'd always assumed was just for old plumbing. We think there's something under your diner, Hope said. Something that never made it into any official records. Clarice's head reeled. A basement. I thought it was just a crawl space. Daniel looked grim. We think it was more than that. It may have been a holding area. Or even an underground pass-through. Some of the children on the list were last seen in that neighborhood. Timeline matches. And if that's true, there could be evidence still hidden down there. Clarice pressed a hand to her chest, her heartbeat wild. You're saying the answers might have been beneath my feet all these years? Daniel nodded. We think that's why they're watching you now. Not just because you might remember, but because you might stumble on something they left behind. Hope added. And someone else is also looking. Clarice turned sharply. Someone else. Hope pulled up a file on her phone. A blurry still from a security camera. A man wearing a gray hoodie and sunglasses walking around the back of the diner 2 nights ago. Timestamp just past midnight. We don't know who he is. But he's been in 3 different places linked to this case. Someone who's not with the people following you, but not with us either. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. We call him the third man. He's been just out of reach, always showing up hours before or after key events. It's like he's looking for something too. Clarice's eyes stayed on the grainy image. There was something familiar about the way the man stood, the way his shoulders sloped. Something about the shape of his jaw. I've seen him, she said suddenly. Not his face but that jacket. He was near the bus stop last week. Watching the diner. Hope nodded. He's getting closer. Clarice dropped the photo and email back on the table and stepped away. This is too much. I don't know what's happening. 1 minute I'm just a woman running a small diner. And now I don't even know what I am anymore. Daniel stood beside her. You're the only person who was inside that building while it was being used. Whether you meant to be or not, you're a witness. Critical one. That makes you dangerous, to both sides. Clarice shook her head slowly. And what if I don't want to be part of this? You already are, Hope whispered. Before Clarice could respond, Daniel's phone buzzed. He checked it and froze. His expression changed immediately, jaw tightening as he turned the screen toward them. New message. No name. Just a number. You're not safe at the cabin. He's close. Get out. Basement access. Coordinates sent. Hope stared at the message. Is it him? The third man. Daniel hesitated. Could be. But if it is, He knows more than he should. Clarice grabbed her coat. If he knows what's under the diner, we need to get there before anyone else does. Daniel looked between her and Hope, then gave a nod. All right, we go now. No more hiding. Hope pulled up the coordinates. It's the alley behind the diner. He's pointing us toward the hatch. Clarice felt her pulse in her throat. Everything was leading back there. The place where it all began. The place where she had unknowingly stood in the middle of something much bigger than her small-town life. As they raced back toward the city, Clarice stared at the map in her lap, the red ink smeared slightly from her grip. The basement, the hatch, photos, the missing children. All of it was converging now. But something in her gut told her this wasn't just about the past. It was about what was still coming. And someone, somewhere, was about to do whatever it took to stop her from finding the truth. Helen stood frozen in her doorway, the bright afternoon sun reflecting off the gleaming luxury car parked outside. It looked like something out of a dream or a movie. The engine had stopped, but no one stepped out. She tightened her faded apron around her waist, glancing up and down the street. Nothing else moved. Just that car, sitting silently, humming with something unspoken. Then the driver's side door slowly opened. A man stepped out. Sharp black suit. Confident but not flashy. His eyes scanned the house, locking onto Helen like he'd been rehearsing this moment for years. Her heart pounded, her mind spinning back to a time long gone. A time of rain, hunger, and two small faces. A time when all she had was kindness to give. The man took a few steps forward, stopping at the edge of her porch. He said nothing at first, just looked at her like he was trying to match the woman in front of him to an image burned in his heart. Then his lips curved into a smile, soft, almost boyish. "You probably don't remember me," he said. Helen narrowed her eyes, searching his face. "Should I?" He chuckled, a deep, warm sound. 15 years ago. That little diner on Route 9. 2 kids came in, soaked to the bone, no money, but real hungry. Helen felt the breath catch in her chest. "Derek," she whispered, stunned. "You were the older one." He nodded. "And that little girl with me was my sister Layla." Her hands trembled as she brought them to her face. "You two just vanished after that day. I never knew what happened." She stopped, the weight of years pressing against her words. "I always wondered." Derek climbed the porch steps and gently took her hand. "You gave us more than food. You gave us dignity. You made us feel human again. That meal, it changed something in me. In both of us." Helen's eyes welled with tears. "You were just kids. I couldn't let you go hungry." "You didn't just feed us," Derek said, his voice thick with emotion. "You told me to take care of my sister, to protect her no matter what. And I did. But I also made a promise that day. That if I ever got out of the life we were stuck in, if I ever had the chance, I'd come back." He handed her a sleek envelope from his coat. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a deed. Her name on it. The house fully paid off. And a check. A number so big it made her sit down. "I don't understand," she said, stunned. "What is this?" "My way of saying thank you," Derek said. "After that day we got placed in foster care. It wasn't easy. But eventually someone took a chance on us. I worked my way through college. Got into tech. Built something. And it worked. I owe it all to the moment someone saw me not as a street kid, but as a person." Helen stared at him, the young man she once gave a warm plate to, now standing in front of her a successful, confident entrepreneur. But just as she began to process the overwhelming generosity, a sleek black SUV pulled up behind Derek's car. The mood shifted. Derek turned sharply, tension in his eyes. "I wasn't followed," he muttered. "I was careful." The door of the SUV opened. A woman stepped out. Elegant, poised. But her expression was clouded with concern. "Lila." Helen recognized her instantly. You've grown into a beautiful woman." Layla smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk." Inside, Helen ushered them both in, locking the door behind them. The living room felt suddenly small, intimate, charged. "There's something else we didn't tell you," Derek said, lowering his voice. "When we left your diner that night, we weren't just running from hunger. We were escaping someone." Helen's brows knit in confusion. "Our stepfather," Layla added quietly. "He wasn't kind. We thought we lost him. But a few months ago he resurfaced. Tried to make contact." Helen's heart dropped. "Is he?" "He's been watching," Derek said. "I don't know how much he knows about our lives now. But we think he may have followed us here." Helen suddenly felt the years lift away again. The tension, the fear, the protective instinct. "You're not alone now," she said firmly. "Whatever this is, we'll face it together." As the evening deepened, Derek and Layla filled her in with more. About a mysterious letter they'd received weeks earlier, unsigned, threatening to reclaim what's owed. About a break-in at Derek's office, where only old foster care records were accessed. And about an unmarked car that kept parking outside Layla's apartment every few nights, always gone by morning. It was clear this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. That night, as Derek and Layla stayed in Helen's guest rooms for safety, she stood by her kitchen window, staring out at the quiet street. The check still sat on the counter, untouched. But in her heart, she already knew. The greatest thing that had come back to her wasn't money or a fancy car. It was a connection, a circle completed, and perhaps a new chapter just beginning. But what none of them saw was the figure across the street, leaning against the shadows, watching, waiting. The sun was setting gently over the quiet neighborhood as Martha stood at the edge of her porch, her fingers resting lightly on the smooth chrome of the car's hood. It all still felt like a dream. The luxury vehicle in her driveway gleamed like a miracle, a symbol of something deeper than money or status. It was the answer to a past act of kindness she had long forgotten was even remarkable. Tears blurred her eyes as she looked up to see Elijah standing near the gate, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl who clung shyly to his side. For a long moment no one said a word. The air between them was heavy with memories, some spoken, others only ever felt. Then Elijah stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Martha," he said, using the name from long ago. "I never forgot you. That day, that sandwich. It wasn't just food. It was dignity. It was love. It was everything." Martha pressed her hand to her chest, overwhelmed. Her voice trembled. "I just did what anyone should have done, baby. Y'all looked hungry, scared. I couldn't walk away. But most people did," Elijah said softly. "You didn't. That kindness shaped who I became. It reminded me that no matter how cold the world can get, there's still warmth left in it. And when I got to a place in life where I could give back, I knew I had to find you." She looked at him now, not the hungry boy with big, watchful eyes, but the man he'd grown into. Confident, successful, yet still carrying that quiet humility she had seen in him as a child. He handed her a set of keys, but she shook her head. "Elijah, honey, I don't need that car." "I know," he said, smiling. "But I needed to do something. And it's not just the car. It's everything that's coming with it. I've set up a monthly allowance for you to cover whatever you need. I'm also working with some of my people to renovate this house. It deserves to be as strong as you've always been." Martha gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "You don't have to do all that." "I know," he replied gently. "But you did something you didn't have to do either." Behind Elijah, his younger sister Sophia finally spoke. Her voice was soft but certain. "You saved our lives." Martha stepped forward and wrapped the girl into a hug, her heart aching at how much time had passed, how much she hadn't known. She hadn't expected anything in return when she offered those kids a warm meal. She certainly hadn't imagined that one of them would grow up to be the CEO of a tech firm, or that he'd come back one day not just to say thank you, but to change her life too. As the evening wore on, they sat on her old porch together, laughing, catching up, remembering. Elijah shared more about his journey, how after Martha helped them that day, A local church took them in, how they struggled but held on to hope, how a teacher saw something in him and encouraged his education. He told her about the long nights, the jobs he worked to get through school, and how he built his business from the ground up. Every part of his story traced back to one afternoon in a little diner where a kind woman gave 2 orphans more than just food. The neighborhood kids wandered over, drawn to the shiny car, but stayed to hear the laughter and feel the warmth coming from Martha's porch. Word had already started spreading. People who used to pass by her without much notice were now looking at her differently, not because she was suddenly linked to success, but because they saw what she had been all along, a quiet hero. Before Elijah and Sophia left that night, he handed Martha a small box. Inside was a delicate necklace with a pendant shaped like a sandwich, engraved on the back with the words, "You fed more than just our stomachs." Martha laughed through her tears. "You got jokes now, huh?" He smiled. "I thought you'd appreciate it." She did. Not because of its worth, but because it meant he remembered every detail. It meant that even when life got hard, even when they were scared, her kindness had stuck with them. That was more precious than gold. In the weeks that followed, things began to change in quiet, powerful ways. The renovations started, but more importantly, Martha started getting visits from people she'd served over the years. Folks she hadn't thought much about. A lonely old man, a teen she once protected from trouble, a single mom she'd slipped extra pancakes to when she saw her skipping meals for her kids. They came one by one to say thank you. Inspired by Elijah's story, people began looking back at their own lives, remembering the ways Martha had touched them too. And Martha, she kept doing what she always did. She kept cooking for neighbors, giving warm advice to the young, offering space on her porch to anyone who needed to sit a while and breathe. The difference was, now people listened when she spoke. They saw her, not just as a waitress, not just as someone who passed by quietly in their day, but as a woman who'd built a legacy of compassion. One afternoon, as she watched a little boy ride his bike past her house, she thought about how one small act of kindness had rippled through so many lives. It wasn't about rewards or recognition. It was about doing the right thing even when no one was watching. Even when you weren't sure it would matter. Martha knew not everyone would be lucky enough to have a luxury car show up in their driveway, or someone from their past come back with gratitude. But that wasn't the point. The real miracle was knowing that every act of kindness plants a seed. Some grow slowly, some take years. But when they bloom, they change everything. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the warm light bathed her home in gold, Martha sat back in her chair, the necklace resting softly against her chest, and smiled. Life had been hard, yes. But it had also been beautiful. Because somewhere out there, even in the hardest moments, people still chose love. Still chose kindness. Still chose each other. And that was a story worth remembering.